My name is Gene Vanover, and I was a pilot in the 17th Special Operations Squadron based at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, Saigon, Vietnam. I was there from November of 1970 till August of 1971. Before I get into the stories of what happened to me while I was there, I want to give a little information on how I got there. Uh, right out of pilot training, I was assigned to fly KC-135 tankers, and they sent me to Altus Air Force Base, Altus, Oklahoma, uh, to be a co-pilot in the KC-135 A model. Had a good time there. It was good flying. Got TDYs to Thailand a couple of times and really enjoyed the crews that I worked with. But we came back from our second TDY to Thailand, and my wife, Nellie Jean, decided that she didn't want to be married to somebody that was gone 8 to 9 months a year. And so she wanted a divorce. And I did what I could to try to salvage everything because we have a 3-year-old daughter, Debbie. But she didn't want to do that. She wanted to take Debbie and her new boyfriend and move to Washington State. And so with that information, I went over to personnel at Altus and I said, I need a change of environment. I want to get sent somewhere else. I don't care where you send me or what I'm doing, just get me off this base. And the sergeant there said, well, Captain, he said, I'll do everything I can to get you a good assignment, and said, give me a number and I'll call you. Well, he called me the next day, said, come on over here. So I went over there and walked in the door and he says, Captain, you're going to Vietnam. I said, well, I really wasn't planning on going quite that far, but I guess it's going to be okay. What am I going to be doing? And he said, you're going to fly a fixed wing gunship, a AC119. I said, I have no earthly idea what even that is. And he said, don't worry about it. You're going to go to training for 6 months, and then you'll learn everything you need to know before they ship you over there. Once I received the news that I was going to Vietnam, I was in a little bit of shock, but at the same time, I was excited that I'd actually get to go see some real combat. So I called my mom and dad, told them that I needed them to watch Debbie for an extended period of time. And they go, well, how long? I said, about a year. And of course, they were excited the fact that we were going to keep Debbie with us, but they weren't too excited that I was going to Vietnam and be in actual combat. So she and I went off to Ohio. I wanted to take her with me because I hadn't spent any time with her at all her first 3 years. And I wanted to have her have some kind of a memory of me in case I didn't come back. So everything went well, both places. At Lockbourne, I had one instructor. In fact, he gave me my check ride when we finished. And he kind of took a special liking to me and gave me some extra tips and hints on how to survive. But one thing he told me that was real important was he said, you know, when this airplane was new 20 years ago, that all the specifications and performance information was accurate. But after 20 years, it's not accurate. And you need to add 10 knots to every takeoff speed, every kind of a maneuvering speed that you're doing, add 10 knots to it. And that'll be a buffer to help maybe save your life. So, well, we finished our training at Lockbourne, and Debbie and I went back to Fort Worth, Texas, and I dropped her off with my mom and dad and jumped on a plane and headed for California. I got out there and we were at Travis Air Force Base, and they had a contract carrier that got us all loaded. It was a 727 and had about 200 people on it, about 75 more people than it was comfortable with. But off we went to Anchorage, Alaska, the first stop of our trip over to Vietnam. We landed in Anchorage and everybody got off the plane. They refueled it and we loaded back on and took off and didn't have any problems and headed over toward Japan. And about 6 hours after we took off from Anchorage, there was a plane just like ours carrying the same crew and people that it was on our aircraft, mainly military people, and it crashed on takeoff and it killed about 70, 80 people. And of course, we in front of it, we never heard anything about it. And when we all landed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines to go to jungle survival school, we heard about it. In fact, they had a bunch of people trying to call all the people that were on my plane, thinking that we may have got killed in that crash in Alaska. And so I assured everybody that I wasn't killed and everything was okay, but it was kind of scary to be almost killed before I even got in country. Then we started jungle survival school. They put us in a hotel off base because there were so many people going through. And one afternoon I was leaving my room and I walked down this outside hallway, turned the corner, walked about 6, 8 steps, and I felt motion behind me. And I turned around and there was a Filipino with a machete with a 3-foot blade on it, holding it over his head, walking real fast toward me. He was about 6, 8 feet away from me. And when I turned, it startled him. And I got in a defensive position and he turned around and ran. And I said, well, that's a good idea. So I turned around and ran the opposite direction. And I said, this is kind of bad. I said, I almost got killed twice and I haven't even had a shot fired at me. So that worked out okay though. But anyway, we got in country, landed at Tonsanute, and I went over to 17th Special Operations Squadron and reported in. And they said, well, welcome to Vietnam. And you're going to be on a mission tomorrow night. But we're only going to be flying as a co-pilot for a couple of days. And then you're going to have your own crew. So a couple of days later, they assembled me a crew and we started flying missions and we're flying mainly in Cambodia. We were flying night and day both. So, you couldn't get accustomed to one way or another. One night, not too long after we were set up as a crew, we were flying along in the middle of the night, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and my co-pilot was Ralph Lafarth. Ralph, good man, good friend now. He and I stayed in touch ever since I found the association. And but we were looking out the windscreen, looking for anything that might be going on, and all of a sudden we both saw a little red light on and off. And I immediately reached over and turned on the landing gear, and there was a C-47 coming right directly toward us. I immediately hard left rudder, hard left turn, and fortunately the Vietnamese pilot did the same thing, and we just passed. I don't know how we kept from clipping wings at least, or maybe even a head-on collision, but he was so close to us that I could hear the engine on the C-47 and I could see the co-pilot's face looking at me. And of course, he had that look of sure terror, same look I had, but we missed each other. And of course, everybody in the back of the plane was yelling and screaming, what are you trying to do, kill us? And we said, no, we're trying to save your life. So we almost had a mid-air collision. So that was kind of exciting. I was getting an instructor check ride so I could teach other pilots, primarily Vietnamese, how to fly our plane. And the instructor that was helping us there, giving me my checkout, was Colonel Strickland. And he was a pretty straight-laced guy, but he was fair. And we were flying along, looking for action, talking to the ground commanders. And all of a sudden, my NAS calls on the intercom and says, hey, pilot, I've got hundreds of campfires below us in that forest off to the left. And it was something that you wouldn't necessarily see. You might see 2 or 3 little campfires, but not a mass number. Well, Colonel Strickland said, fly straight ahead, act like nothing happened. And he says, let's get a hold of every ground commander and our commanders back at Tonsanute and make sure there are no friendlies in that area. So we did, and they came back with the clearance rather fast. Really, it was only about 30 minutes. They said, if there's anybody in that area, they're bad people. And so we rolled back the other direction, headed toward the target, and we gained about 400 foot of elevation altitude so that we could coast into the firing circle because we didn't want the fire coming out of the exhaust to be seen by the people on the ground, and we didn't want the noise from the engines making any noise. So we coasted into the firing circle with all 4 guns on high rate, and we started laying down bullets wherever the night observation device pointed. That's where I shot, and we made a complete 360-degree circle, not shooting steady but shooting bursts, and we probably expended 24,000 rounds in a couple of minutes. And as soon as we finished that 360, I pulled off and pulled straight out because I figured, well, we probably made some people mad on the ground and they may start shooting back at us, so we need to get out of here. So we flew on and off and we were out of bullets just about, so we went on back to Tonsanute. The next morning we come in And somebody said, "Hey, Vanover, go look at the Shatter Shooter of the Week board." And we went in there, and our name was on there. The crew's name was on there, and they had 600 confirmed kills. So we were really proud of eliminating that many bad guys, because ain't no telling how many of our friends and allies and our own soldiers that they would have killed. So we were real happy with the results of that mission. We had an late afternoon takeoff. Everything was normal on engine run up and check out and everything. So we pulled out on the runway, put the power to the engines, and off we rolled down the runway. And as that instructor told me at Lockburn, always add 10 knots to everything you do. And so when the co-pilot called for gear up, I just held her down another 10 knots or 12 knots, and then I started lifting her up. And this was the first flight with this new co-pilot. He had never flown in Vietnam before, and I don't remember his name, unfortunately, but he raised the gear, and the right engine just quit. It's just like you pulled the fuel, throttle, everything out. And immediately I put in hard left rudder, and I leveled out. Instead of continuing to try to climb, I leveled out to try to get some airspeed. And I put my hand on the right throttle, and I told McCormick was my flight engineer, I says, "Stay on my hand with me. We're going to pull back the right throttle to see if it changes anything." And we pulled it back, and nothing changed. So I said, "Okay, the right engine is dead. Feather the right prop." And he put his hand on the right propeller, and we feathered it. And of course, the gear, because we only had half the hydraulics, was coming up extra slow. And the prop didn't want to feather as quickly as it's supposed to. But being able to keep the altitude above the trees and increase airspeed on one engine was a big deciding factor of us being able to continue flying. And we started out away from the airport, flat and level, because I wanted all the lift I could get on the wings. And I told the guys in the back, my gunners and aluminum operator, I said, "Throw everything out that has any weight." So we threw all the bullets out, and they threw all the flares out, and everything down to one of the gunners, Crispin. He called up, he said, "Pilot, we got everything out of the airplane except the parachutes. You want me to throw them out?" I said, no, don't throw them out. I said, "We'll have to write up all kinds of paperwork explaining why we threw parachutes out of an airplane that's getting ready to crash." So we held on to them. And about that time, riding in our jump seat was our squadron commander, Colonel Teal. He flew with a different crew to get his combat time every month. And he flew with me fairly often. And he called up and said, "Pilot." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Are we going to crash?" I said, "Well, Colonel Teal," I said, "I'm doing my absolute best to see if we don't crash." And I never heard another word out of him. So I guess that satisfied him. And McCormick was really doing a great job keeping that left engine running. To explain a little bit, the cowlings on the engine allow cooling. And if you close the cowling, it lessens the drag. But if you get the engine too hot, you got to open the cowling up. So he was busy opening and closing the cowling, keeping the engine highest performance it could get. And he said, "Pilot, I don't think we can keep this thing going that much longer." So I went into a slow turn to the right into the dead engine. And so we started downwind back toward Tan Son Nhut runway. And we wasn't gaining any altitude, but we had a good steady 140 knot airspeed. And the flaps were up, the gear was up. And so we were as trimmed out as we could be. And the next crisis was a landing. The problem you have when you only have one engine is that your landing gear operates slower than normal. And if you drop the landing gear too soon, it's going to cause a tremendous amount of drag, and you will go down at a faster rate than you want to. If you lower the gear too late, then you're going to be flaring for landing and the gear won't be down. Well, we were lucky that day. Dropped the gear and everything came down green, 2 green lights on the main gear. But the nose gear didn't have a green light. So I told Crispin, I said, look, see if you can see if the gear's down. He's looking through a little hole toward the front of the aircraft on the bottom. And he said, "Pilot, it looks like the gear's down. The gear looks like it's down." Well, just about that time, we touched down with the main gear. And that jolt knocked the nose gear a little bit more forward and we got the green light. So we had all three green and we put the nose down and slowed down. Didn't do any reverse drops or anything like that. We just let it coast. And then we pulled off the runway. I never seen so many relieved people. We were all halfway crying and halfway happy and excited that we survived this, because unfortunately there was a couple of airplanes that had the same thing happen to them, and several of the people died in the crash. So we were very, very lucky that night. And we got back inside and they said, you guys can have the night off. You don't have to fill in for the next flight. So we all went home and got some sleep. But the last thing I want to talk about a little bit was I earned a Distinguished Flying Cross. And that was, again, you just had to be in the right place at the right time. But we were out on a mission and it was a daytime mission. And we had this small village that we'd worked with these ground people for several times over the last few weeks. And they were about to be overrun by a large Viet Cong force that was in the trees off to the side of where this little village was. And behind the village was a river. It wasn't a big river. It was probably 50 yards wide or something like that. And they were trying to evacuate the village people with boats to get them across the river where they could get away from the Viet Cong before they overran the city. And they told us where they were and where the bad guys were. And so we started laying some bullets down, and we stayed on target over an hour, suppressing any fire. Because when we started shooting, the bad guys all got hunkered down in their bunkers and they didn't shoot back. So we were pretty lucky there for a while. But then they had some 50 cal that they had positioned directly underneath our aircraft when we were supposed to be over the target, and they started shooting straight up at us. And so we took three hits in the bottom, but it didn't break any lines that made any difference. So we just kept on shooting, and we silenced that gun crew, and the village. Finally, they all got across the river, and we called for replacement. The replacement came in, got there before we left, and so we saved about 200 or 300 village people. And like I said, we took a couple hits, but nobody in our crew got injured. And so that was a real successful mission. And like I say, we all earned a Distinguished Flying Cross for that. The last thing that I got to do while I was over there is I got to be one of the instructors to train the Vietnamese on how to fly our mission. That wasn't as enjoyable and fun as actually me flying the aircraft, but because I'm standing up behind the pilot and trying to look through the gun sight and help him was a little bit hard on my back. But the Vietnamese were very cooperative, and like I say, I got some satisfaction out of teaching them so that they could do our mission. It was getting in August, and my separation date was coming up, so they pulled me off my crew and shipped me back to the United States, and it sent me back to Travis, and there they separated me from the military, and I went off to seek my fortune in the civilian world.